Good afternoon, Facebook friends, and I know some of you are watching this on YouTube. Here we are again, Janine LaRue of LaRueless Cafe. We are going to have a conversation today. I know I've been out this morning, and a lot of you who are out and about, and those who will watch this show well after it plays live, we're all wondering, what do we do about these masks? All of a sudden, they're telling us it's okay, take the mask off. Is it really okay to take it off? Well, how bad is the pandemic right now? We just have a lot of questions that are going on, and the new advisory that came out from the CDC. So we have someone on here today who I have a lot of respect for. Absolutely love her. She knows what she's talking about. She has a story to tell beyond being a doctor, and we're going to talk about her story. So we're going to bring on, without further ado, to talk about this pandemic. Where are we right now? What is safe? What might not be safe? What can we look forward to in the future? None other than someone who I have just adopted, love her so much, Dr. Christy Pernell.
Hi.
Dr. Pernell, how are you?
I'm good. I'm blessed. It's a beautiful day today, and so happy to be with you.
It is a beautiful day. Let me tell you, thank you for coming on such a short notice here with the LaRuel's Cafe. We're going to talk to you. Now, you're a medical doctor, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. I know you are. So you're a medical doctor. And we are going to talk about this whole issue of the pandemic. I know a lot of times I sit in my family room and I click on the TV because I always want to know, what do the experts have to say about what's going on, particularly now that they're talking about we can take the mask off inside in some places. And I love Dr. Fauci, but I always tell people I like to see on CNN and MSNBC, the person who I love to hear her voice as well is Dr. Christy Pernell, because I know that you are called upon pretty much almost on a weekly basis on some of these networks, and you have become a mighty big voice out there about this pandemic. Where are you originally from, Dr. Pernell?
I'm a New Jersey girl through and through. I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. So proud to be from East Orange. Shout out to Mayor Ted Green. Shout out to Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver. My family, we were primarily raised in East Orange, and since then, I've lived in Newark, New Jersey. We have a home there in the North Ward, and I'm right now currently in Montclair.
Okay. All right. Well, I used to live in East Orange for a little bit myself. I lived in the same building where the lieutenant governor used to live at 320 South Harrison. I was there for about 7 years. Love East Orange. Love it. And at what point in your life did you decide you wanted to become a doctor?
Okay, this is a very fascinating story, I think, if I can be forthright. I, like a lot of children, listed becoming a physician as one of the things I wanted to do when I grew up, right? But I can tell you, around the 6th grade at Elmwood Grammar School in East Orange, New Jersey, I had a guest speaker in my class. And this woman wasn't a physician, but she was talking about all of the different types of roles and responsibilities in the healthcare field. And she mentioned a neurosurgeon, which is a brain surgeon. And it piqued my imagination and my interest. Literally, I was captivated, Janine. I ran home that day and I said, Mom, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. And she's like, Chris, what is that? And my mother sought out every opportunity when I was just a young girl for me to learn about neurosurgery. I had a book, I Dream a World, that had the first Black female neurosurgeon in it, Alexa Kennedy. I read all of the books by Ben Carson, and I went out to medical school and even started my first year of general surgery internship at UCLA, thinking I would go on to become a neurosurgeon. But I had another epiphany. And that epiphany at that point in my life in 2003 is that I most certainly wanted to be a doctor, but there were other types of things that I really, really enjoyed doing. I loved policy, I loved politics, I loved community, and I needed to find a way how to combine those passions with the passion for clinical medicine. And it took me some time, but I ultimately learned about, trained in, and have become a board certified public health and preventive medicine physician.
That's an amazing story. And you made this decision at a very, very, very young age.
Yes, yes. I was just steadfast on this decision. I've had friends that I've grown up with from East Orange, and one I had lost contact with after college. And she said, "Chris Pernell, I was looking for you. I called the Neurological Surgery Society. I just knew if anybody was going to be a neurosurgeon, it was Chris Pernell, because that's all you spoke about. You always spoke about being a doctor, and that type of doctor in particular." And I can tell you, having such a large dream at a young age was great. It was a blessing. It forced and honed an even greater sense of excellence. My father cultivated that, first of all, and my mother too. My dad and my mother did not go to college, but they were very hardworking, very highly skilled persons. My father worked at Bell Labs, though he started there cutting grass. And I want everybody to hear that. My father started at the famous Bell Labs cutting grass, and through opportunity got into the lab, reading textbooks that night, taking courses at the lab. My father became a member of technical staff and worked in labs and on projects that were just quite revolutionary. And so being raised by that man, and my mom has a PhD in love, I like to tell people, I knew how important it was to be excellent, but I also knew how important it was to be driven by a passion.
What a story. What
Yeah.
started cutting grass. And
Yeah.
it does not go by me, the fact that you have this major drive that you do. And I think I blinked out for a couple of seconds, but you can still hear me.
Yes.
So you went on to Princeton University and graduated. Oh my goodness. When I saw you went to Princeton, and tell us about that, and Duke.
Yes, yeah. So education was always very important in my household. All of my siblings primarily went to Rutgers. My brother started out at NJIT and then transferred to Rutgers. So primarily my family was a Rutgers family. And I knew, wanting to be a neurosurgeon, I used to tell my mom, look, I have to go to the most competitive programs possible. And so she was just encouraging me. She said, the sky's the limit. Apply where you would like to go, Chris. Apply everywhere. And so I applied to Rutgers. I applied to Princeton. I applied to Duke. I applied to UPenn. And I applied to UVA. And I can tell you, it really was the tour. When I went and I toured the Princeton campus, something in my heart and my spirit clicked. And I said, this is the place for me. And I'm very, very proud to have gone to Princeton University. It was challenging. It was challenging on so many levels, not just academically, because I really have been prepared in high school. I was a tuition student at Glen Ridge Public High School. And so I had been prepared academically, and actually I had been prepared socially and culturally, because I was one of few Black students and students of color at Glen Ridge. And so Princeton was actually a larger playing field. And I didn't feel like I was under such a microscope as I had felt in high school. But Princeton is where I cultivated a love of arts and a love of science. I danced and helped to lead the Black Arts Dance Company there. I participated in the Princeton University Gospel Ensemble, the Hallelujah Worship Service, those things that were bedrock, alongside being at one of the top universities in the world, being instructed by Nobel Prize winners, being in classrooms with people from all over the world, and having an opportunity to have a position, take a stand around it, and to see how your thoughts can thrive. So I left Princeton very well prepared for my next steps. And ultimately I went on to Duke Medical School, which was like a second home for me, because my granny wasn't very far in Clarksville, Virginia. And so I've been blessed to be educated in some very rich academic environments, but it was never easy. And what I mean by that is, as a Black woman, and especially as a young Black woman coming of age, as I was coming of age academically, I'm coming of age in my womanhood and my personhood, I learned how to use my voice to fight for what I thought was right. I didn't call it equity then, because I just didn't have an understanding of equity, but to learn how to speak up for equity. And I was learning that in both of those programs.
What a story. What a story. We're so blessed to have you there. And I guess as you were going through your training, did you ever think that you were going to see something like a pandemic, what we are looking at right now?
You know, I don't know that anyone necessarily expects it, except for probably my infectious disease peers, colleagues who are trained in infectious diseases. I didn't expect it, but I knew it was always possible. Okay, we were seeing outbreaks of varying degrees and sizes, and I knew the need for preparedness, especially as I segued into public health and preventive medicine. And a component of public health training is around disaster and emergency planning and preparedness. And so being prepared for pandemics is one of those types of crises that a nation, that a world has to have the readiness to attack at the very beginning stages of it. So no, did I think it would happen when it happened, but I knew if you just looked across the trajectory of history, it would happen again.
You have evolved and have surfaced as a major voice in this whole issue of disease, the impact it has on people, the impact it has on people of color. At what point in January, February, or March of 2020, when did you realize personally how bad this thing was going to be on us?
Yeah, so in January, I started to have some very early understanding that what was unfolding was peculiar. Just because of reports that were coming across from China. And actually, where I worked at a hospital in New York, we would get a case here or there that people were being evaluated. Is this an episode of this coronavirus that had been described? And so that's how we spent a lot of January, February. You know, I'm paying attention and watching what's happening, not only in China, but what's happening soon thereafter in the Pacific Northwest, what's happening in Washington. And we know that viruses don't respect borders. We know that viruses travel. They travel hundreds and thousands and millions of miles. And so it was really by March that I knew something was upon us that we had not witnessed before. And it started out as that part of the conversation, when would it happen? And then it became, it has happened. Then it became, how far will this crisis grow? And as that was happening across the month of March in New Jersey, our first laboratory confirmed diagnosis was March 1st. In the United States, the first laboratory confirmed diagnosis was January 20th. And so we knew something was setting off. And then my dad went into the hospital for an unrelated condition early March, and the concern in the hospital and the rapidly changing guidelines around access to him, I knew that we were facing something that I wasn't quite sure we were fully prepared for.
How old was your father at the time?
My father was 78. He had just turned 78.
Mm-hmm. And so he ended up in the hospital for an unrelated situation, yes. March of 2020.
Yes. My father, we described him as the bionic man. Okay, Janine. He was a man, not only had my dad endured and overcame the Jim Crow South, not only did I told you the story of how my father started out at Bell Labs and the work he went on to do. He ultimately ended up at the University of Virginia working with engineering grad students and an instructor for them. But my dad had a host of medical conditions. My father had very severe emphysema. My father had chronic HIV/AIDS. My father had end-stage lymphoma. And we actually thought we were going to lose my dad in about November of 2019, but he pulled through, off ventilation and everything. And so my father had been at a subacute rehab, recouping and regaining his strength. He was very much looking forward to coming home. We were talking about his favorite meals. He was laughing, he was talking, he was walking, and he got an infection in his line that he was receiving antibiotics through. And so I told the center, look, send him to the hospital. I want to make sure he gets a thorough evaluation. And I had full confidence that he was going to be well taken care of. I knew his doctors personally. And within, I would say, no more than 10 days at the hospital, he was awaiting placement. So he was still there. He was rock solid. He was never very sick clinically. It just tested positive on some of his lab cultures. He was waiting for placement back.
He tested positive for COVID?
No, he was tested positive for another infection.
Wow.
And so he was just waiting for placement back to subacute rehab so he can continue his course of long-term IV antibiotics. And I got a phone call one day. Rapidly, my father declined. Rapidly, he had difficulty breathing. Rapidly, his vital signs were not stable. And those type of episodes, Janine, happened 3 times, probably within the span of 5 days. And I remember that his doctor said, we're going to have to test him. I said, you most certainly have to test him. I think he may have coronavirus. And he did.
Did you suspect it earlier once you knew what was happening with your dad before they said, I think we're going to have to test him?
Yeah, it was in the back of my mind. It was in the back of my mind. So even with that very first phone call, it was in the back of my mind because I knew what we were starting to see in New Jersey hospitals. And like I said, his infectious disease doctors were pretty with it. They were concerned too. One had told me, look, I don't even round on him if I don't need to. I speak to him from the door because the cases were starting to explode in the hospital. And when I was still allowed to visit him, because I worked in a hospital, I pretty much was following the same suit as his doctors. I would stay out of his room. I would come to his door and I would just say, hi, I'm checking on you. I wouldn't go in and things of that nature. Had been in maybe one time, probably around the 10th or so of March. Everyone was taking as many precautions as we could. And so when he had that very, very rapid onset, I said, this could very well be coronavirus because that's what we were beginning to see. That's what we're beginning to see in my own hospital. That's what we were seeing in hospitals across New York and New Jersey. And after the 3rd episode, it was adamant. I was like, he has to be tested. And then we almost said it simultaneously, myself and his physician.
Was your dad aware at the time that perhaps he had this virus?
Very aware. He was very aware. Actually, at the time that my dad went ahead and got tested, I developed flu-like symptoms. And so I had to get tested. And my dad knew that I had been tested. And that was his primary concern. He was like, oh, my father called me Boo. That's my nickname. I love telling people that I'm a Boo. And he said, oh, Boo, I hope you don't have this thing. I could have it. I remember him saying that to me. I could very well have this, but I hope you don't have this thing. And I said, Daddy, don't worry about me. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be fine. And I said, and you're going to be fine too. You get through everything. We're going to figure out what's going on. We're going to do everything in our power to maintain so we can get you back home. Remember, the goal is to get you back home and you live out the home stretch of your life with your family. And I got a negative report. He was so excited. I remember the joy in his voice when I told him, but he had already heard that he was positive.
So tell us, if you can talk about it.
Sure.
How long was he hospitalized?
My father probably lived for another 10 days, 2 weeks tops after being confirmed positive for coronavirus, and started to rapidly deteriorate within the last week of his life. I remember, because at this point, no one could go into hospitals, and it was eerily prophetic. My father said to us, I remember on the Sunday, I knew because I worked in a hospital, I told my family, the visiting guidelines are going to change very soon and we're not going to be able to see Daddy. So I wanted to prepare my family. And I remember having that conversation on a Saturday, I believe, with my family. And by that Sunday, the visiting guidelines were changing. And we got permission right before they got enacted for one of us to go upstairs. And my brother is the bishop, Bishop Pernell. And so he went up and he said, Daddy, we're not going to be able to see you face to face. We're going to call you. We're going to FaceTime you. He was like, Boo's going to be checking in with your doctors every day, multiple times a day. And he said so eerily but prophetic, if I can't see my family, I'm not going to make it. And this is before my father knew he had coronavirus or even really had begun to display symptoms. He said, if I can't see my family, I'm not going to make it. He said, I'm living for you all. I'm living to live out my days with my family. That's what he said. And my brother was like, I tried to encourage him. He was just so down that we weren't going to be able to see him. And my father got sick shortly thereafter. And the week leading up to his death, he was no longer eating. We were cajoling him by the phone. I would have people go by on the Teams. Hey, tell him that we'll make his special meal. My brother would drop it off downstairs. The team
Was
would
he ever
come.
ventilated? Did they ever?
He wasn't, because he had decided he did not want to be ventilated.
Mm-hmm.
When my father had been ventilated previously in that November, December bout of when he was really sick, he had a rupture of some aneurysms in his lungs, and he had to be ventilated. He vowed never to be ventilated again. He said that was a harrowing experience. I never want to be ventilated again. And so when he went back into the hospital this time, I would always have a conversation with him. You know, we're respecting your wishes. We're taking you back to the hospital. They're going to confirm your status with you, that you don't want to be ventilated. So you would be, do not intubate and do not resuscitate. And he said, yeah. He was like, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want to live out my life as much as I can in a normal fashion by my own means. This was a man who drove Janine once from UVA to New Jersey with a pneumothorax. Okay. And for those of you who don't know what a pneumothorax is, it's a collapsed lung. It's a portion of your lung is collapsed. My father drove from Virginia to New Jersey with a pneumothorax. He was a type of man that gutted through difficulty, that gutted through adversity. And so he just knew how he wanted the end of his life to be. So I knew I couldn't have him intubated. So when he started to become very unstable, they wanted to move him to the ICU. He went back from being moved to the ICU to just a higher level of care in the room that he was in. And so as he became increasingly unstable, wasn't eating, that's when I knew, because I had lost my mom in January 2018 to Parkinson's. And that's typically one of the last things when a person may be near the end of their life, no longer eating. And so my dad wasn't eating, and then it became a point he was no longer even speaking on the phone, because they would put the phone up to his ear so we could say something to him. I think the last time I heard his voice probably was on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and my father died the following Monday.
Wow. So as a physician, you're right in the middle of this big fight. You're a physician in a major Newark, New Jersey hospital.
Yes.
And now you're watching your father, his life literally leaving him. He's transitioning from the very disease that you're battling for other people out there. Were you able to have a funeral for him? Because the news were changing.
We did not have the type of homegoing celebration that he had planned. He had told us. My father knew how he wanted the end of his life celebrated. His father was a very well-known bishop, an apostolic or Pentecostal, if you will, bishop in the South at a church in Richmond, Virginia. We were going to have a wake in New Jersey. So he's like, I have to have a wake in New Jersey so my friends from the lab, everybody can come by and pay their final respects. And then we were going to go to Virginia. We're going to have a service in his father's church, standing behind his father's pulpit. And then we were going to bury him next to my mom. Because my father died during the pandemic, we couldn't do any of that. And so it was a very surreal experience of the end of his life. So we were given permission. It was 5 of us to go into the funeral home. They opened the casket very briefly, then closed it, because at that point you couldn't even have an open casket service for family, just for us to identify and see that, you know, he had been done so well. The Wiggins are just beautiful. They're excellent at what they do.
Second to none.
They had done a beautiful job with my mother. She looked like a queen. And likewise, my father, he looked like a king. So just, I'm always thankful to Carolyn Wiggins and the entire family. And so we had a virtual service with about 5 of us physically there. We projected it through Facebook. And then his body was transported to Virginia. We weren't there with him. I wasn't there at the gravesite when he was lowered into the ground. I had a cousin who lived in Virginia. So the funeral home there was like, we can have a couple of people from family stand by. So we had 2 cousins, thankful for Eric and Marcia. But I watched that. Through a feed.
Virtually.
Yes. And that's what was so important when President Biden came into office, that he acknowledged the grief that we were bearing as a nation. It was so important to do that because so many of us had interrupted grief. So many of us weren't able to, show forth the rituals, show forth the customs, the practices that we're so used to doing that is a part of our healing process for that. And so, we've always said we're going to have a date when it feels very, very safe. We're going to have like a memorial, a very open memorial. We've done things virtually. We've spoken with peers from the lab, from UVA, our family, but we're going to do it when it's very safe. So I imagine perhaps this summer even, or early fall, we'll do something to honor and celebrate the life of my father. Quite a great man.
And let me say to you, Doc, I'm so sorry for your loss. I lost relatives during this pandemic.
Yes.
And I will tell you, when I worked for the Barnabas system, at that time, my immediate boss was Ron Del Moro. Everyone knew Ron Del Moro. And he used to say to me, my job was lobbying for the system. He would say, I want to talk to legislators who have been consumers of health. And to hear you as a medical doctor tell your story. And I understand that while your dad was a major, major, major loss for you, you had some other losses in your family through this COVID.
Yes, there is a stat that says that Black women are 2.5 times more likely to know someone who's died from coronavirus. I don't just know someone. You've heard me describe losing my father. Before the turn of the new year, I lost two of my cousins. One who was a very well-known postal worker in North New Jersey. His beat was right by the Wickham's funeral home. Then he ultimately got changed to downtown. Frankie Boswell Jr., he was known as Boz, he was known as Frankie. And my cousin scoured the city looking for a test the weekend before he had a catastrophic stroke that he suffered at home, was rushed to the hospital when his family couldn't get in contact with him, and he never recovered. He never regained consciousness. And we know, and this is so important for people to understand, coronavirus is a respiratory illness, but it's not only a respiratory illness. People with coronavirus can have whole body, whole system sequelae. And so they can have neurological manifestations. They can have clots. My cousin had a clot in his lungs, as well as a clot that led to the stroke that he had. And in addition to losing my cousin Frankie, and Frankie was 59, I lost another cousin, William Boswell Jr., literally within a span of weeks from one another. And he too had been ventilated for a very long time. He had been ventilated for over a month, and then finally succumbed to the disease. And so I lost 3 family members. But in addition to losing 3 family members, my eldest sister, who is a breast cancer survivor, the woman who was always a hero to me growing up, she's 13 years my elder. I'm the baby of my family by almost 10 years. And so she survived breast cancer, mastectomy, chemotherapy, radiation, and it just returned to work. She's a customer service manager. She worked at a large scale retail store and didn't have adequate access to PPE. In the week that we did my father's virtual funeral service, my sister couldn't come because my sister was displaying symptoms and was thereafter confirmed to be positive for coronavirus. My sister is what we call a long hauler. My sister took over 10 months to resume some semblance of her baseline, to come off of supplemental oxygen, to be able to walk and to work again. And so my family has been at the epicenter of this pandemic, not just this state and not just this city. My family has been as the epicenter.
You're amazing. You're amazing. And so now all around the country and really all around the world.
Yes.
Everybody's trying to figure out, how do we test people?
Yes.
How do we find out who's vulnerable?
Yes.
How do we treat them? Different levels of treatment. And then they said, we got to come up with a vaccine.
Yes.
But we got to test it. We need people who will enter a trial. And I understand, Doc, that you raised your hand.
Yes, I did.
And you said, send me. Tell me about the decision-making process. You've lost a father.
Mm-hmm.
2 cousins. You have a sister who is now positive, and you decided, I am going to enter the trial, and I guess it was Moderna.
Yes,
You
yes.
made a decision. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I knew that there would be trials. I'm a public health physician. I know the power of vaccines as powerful tools of prevention. And as we were hearing more and more in the press and more in the academic chatter around these early phase clinical trials that would be offered, when it was discovered that there would be a site at the hospital where I worked in partnership with Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, I said immediately in my spirit, before I vocalized it, but almost immediately in my spirit, I think I need to do this. And I didn't tell anyone at first. And then I started to have conversations. I had a conversation about it at work. I had a conversation with my family. And I remember my family saying, no, you don't need to do that. We've gone through enough. Let someone else do it. And I said, no, Daddy would want me to do this. If Daddy were alive, because we used to talk about HIV vaccines. My father lived as long as he did with a chronic HIV/AIDS infection, which should have taken his life had it not been for the advances in antiretrovirals. We would talk about the benefits of clinical research. We would talk about the benefits of vaccines in particular, and science, just growing and accumulating in knowledge. And so it's like, Daddy would want me to do this. And I prayed about it. I am a woman of deep, deep faith. And I prayed to Yahweh and I said, look, lead me and guide me. I believe this is what I should do. This is my way to pay my father's legacy forward. This is my way to fight back for all of those Black and brown patients in my hospital, all of Americans whose lives have been decimated. And this is my way to demonstrate accountability. If I'm going to go into community and encourage or talk about the power of vaccines and why we should be vaccinated, I want to be able to offer up my life as an example, as a model. So I did my homework and I saw what was already known. I got in a phase 3 clinical trial. And so I read what was known from the phase 0 and phase 1 trials for Moderna and Pfizer. And I spoke with the site investigator. I asked all the questions I needed to ask. There were no unethical practices. It was such a safe process, meaning I was reassured at every step of the way. I was told this was voluntary. I was told I could remove myself at any point, and I was told that there had been no serious medical events reported by anyone who had joined just previous to my group. And so I joined with approximately 30,000 other Americans in the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine trial. I did not know whether I received placebo or the active vaccine. I got my first shot on August 31st, and I got my second shot on October 2nd. The first shot, I really didn't experience anything different than when I would get a flu vaccine, meaning I got pain and tenderness at the injection site. The only systemic symptom that I really experienced with that first shot were headaches. I got headaches for a couple of days post the shot, and then they went away. But I wasn't sure if those headaches just weren't the regular sinus headaches I always would get. And I felt fine. I worked. I continued through the study. I hurt my back, and this just to tell people how thorough the safety process is. I hurt my back, and when you're part of the study, they want to know everything that happens to you. In the beginning, I had to answer an app. I had questions every day. I had to take my temperature, track my symptoms. I would get phone calls. I would go in for regular in-person physical exams. I would have blood drawn where they were checking antibody levels, but they would never report that to me because that would reveal which arm of the study I was in. My second shot was different from my first shot. And so, like I was saying about the back pain, they thoroughly investigate any symptoms that you report during the time. They want to know if it's safe for you to continue in the study. And this made its way all the way up to the major drug safety monitoring review boards, and I was told that I was okay to proceed. This was not linked to the vaccine. I'd had a chronic back issue that flared up. And when I got my second shot, it was different. By the end of the day, I was worn out, and not my typical worn out, exhausted, tired, fatigued. I couldn't get out of my car. And not my typical, I want to just sit in my car for 15 minutes. I literally couldn't get out of my car. I felt my legs felt too heavy to lift. And then I developed a very, very low grade temperature, like 99, almost 100, had headaches again, went to bed that night. And Janine, the next day I felt fine. I was up at the Essex County Correctional Facility Civilian Task Force meeting outside and going about my business.
And you knew by then you had the real thing.
No, I didn't. I didn't find out that I had the real thing until the vaccines both went through emergency use authorization. And when healthcare workers, as part of priority population 1, were given the opportunity to be vaccinated, because it would be considered unethical to withhold that opportunity from us, we were allowed to be unblinded. So the study investigator learned, and we were allowed to learn, if we would so choose, whether or not we had received the vaccine. And I remember when Dr. Swaminathan called me in my office, and she says, "Chris, what do you think you got?" I said, "I think I got the vaccine." She said, "You got it." And I screamed. I was like, "Look, Daddy, I've become the science. I've become the data." Because my dad would always say, "Follow the data, follow the science, follow the data. What does the data tell you?"
I love it.
And it was amazing. It was just like a kiss.
Can we say thank you to you? Can we just, as one who got an appointment for 1 and 2, shot 1 and 2, and I'll never forget the excitement I felt when I got scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
You did this for us. You and thousands others made it possible that we are allowed now to go shopping and to do things that, and alive. I mean, I celebrated my 70th birthday in the middle of a pandemic with 8 people in the backyard, everybody in a mask, and I'm a twin, scared to death.
Right.
But because of you, doctor, there was a light at the end of this tunnel. And I thank you for that. I thank you for that.
I appreciate that. And it's that circle of gratitude, right? It's really a circle of gratitude. It's really a cycle of gratitude. It's really a continuum of gratitude. I was thankful for those who were even enrolled before I was enrolled. I was thankful for the scientists. This is brilliant science. I know a lot of people have been unsettled or startled by the science because it's new for the public, but it's not new in the scientific community. The clinical research community, in particular virologists, have been working with the family of coronaviruses that were responsible for MERS, responsible for the SARS, very related outbreaks in the past decades or so. And as well, scientists have been working with mRNA in the lab for decades, multiple decades. And then in this past decade, some even say within these past 7 years, critical advances were made around how mRNA technology could be used as vaccines. Those credible legs up in the process allowed us to get a vaccine product, not just for one drug company, but for multiple drug companies to market in a record amount of time. Because one, the technology is different. It's designing a genetic sequence. It's not growing a virus in proteins, or it's not growing a virus in eggs, or growing a virus in medium. It's actually designing a virus, a blueprint, a recipe, an instruction sheet, a Snapchat. And the science is brilliant. And I really believe the science is going to be groundbreaking. And also some of the bureaucracy or some of the barriers, the financial barriers that slows down the process were removed, meaning pharmaceutical companies or drug companies were looking at not only whether the vaccine was effective, so they were going through the testing process to see if it was effective and safe. They were likewise going through the manufacturing and logistical issues to say, how would you manufacture or make hundreds of millions of doses? That was happening at the same time. So processes that used to be sequential became parallel. So we were able to get products to market in under emergency use authorization to the public much sooner than we would have otherwise. So I really want the public, stay tuned and understand the lessons we've learned from this, because there are other diseases and conditions that we need to think about. How do we arrive at answers still in an ethical manner, still in an ethically sound and scientifically sound manner, but with less time? We can do that. We need to solve sickle cell, Janine. Too many people in our community We're losing their lives, and their lives are altered by sickle cell. And we need to find the vaccine for HIV. And we can do these things. We can do these things.
It's a lot to think about when you just look at what we have been able to do in this country over the last 12 months with COVID, and so much more work to be done. You're absolutely correct. And I tell you, one of the things that people are still wondering, I mean, I got my shot February, March. Are you still considered?
Yes, I'm still in it. I'm still considered protected, and I'm still in the trial. What we know is that the trial, as it was originally constructed, any person who was involved in the trial, whether you were in placebo, meaning you didn't get the vaccine, you got salt water or saline, versus those in the vaccine arm, you were going to be followed for 2 years. Okay. And you go in and get periodic blood draws. They draw like multiple, like 7, 8, 9 tubes of blood. And that is being tracked. Actually, if you're in the vaccinated arm, they're going to track your antibodies and see what your antibody concentration and titer is at certain key time points. Now, there were people who were inoculated prior to me. So the first inoculations in the very early phases were probably around March. And so we are periodically in the scientific community testing to see what are their antibody titers and concentration levels. As that data becomes published, that's the level of immunity that we can report. So we know that at least 6 months of immunity, at least. That's just the bare minimum. Stay tuned. There are debates whether or not this will be an annual shot versus whether this will be long-term immunity, and you just need to get boosters based off of the current variants that are circulating. There is a lot that we are learning on a daily basis, and there is more for us to learn. But I'm very, very confident that these vaccines are game changers. We do know that immunity via vaccination is stronger than immunity versus natural infection. There have been studies to look at that head to head. And we do know that all of the vaccines currently in use in the United States have robust activity against the known circulating variants. These variants may evade or escape immunity somewhat, but it's still significant enough protection that it would prevent severe outcomes from disease.
Wow. All right. So I feel pretty good. I'm still pretty much safe. Now, are you able to get another vaccine or not?
Not, I won't get another vaccine, and no one will until we know what the recommendation will be around boosters. So one, we need to definitively know how long immunity lasts. And we're going to look at that once people are now just a year out. So that data hasn't been made known, but it's going to be published soon. So people who got shots in March of 2020 are a year out, right? So we have an understanding of what type of antibody titer they have. And then people like myself who are 6 months plus and growing out, we have an understanding of what type of antibody titer we have. So as that science continues to accumulate, alongside knowing that because the technology is very easy to design a vaccine for a particular variant, I believe there will be conversations around in the future, near future, around whether or not people should get booster shots for certain variants. If a variant is found to escape immunity more so than you would want it to, then hey, maybe you'll get a booster shot. But otherwise, right now, there is no indication for me or for you to get vaccinated again yet. We just don't know that answer.
One of our viewers on an issue that you raised earlier is saying that could it be that the fact that all of these pharmaceutical companies had a better camaraderie relationship and they work together rather than being competitive? And if that's the case, why can't they do it for the sake of cures for other disease? Thank you, Angelique Hilton.
I think that's an excellent point. Not only was there widespread collaboration, okay, there were barriers removed. Typically, a pharmaceutical company is not going to work on manufacturing until it knows rock solid that the product works. It wouldn't make financial sense for them to, because they could lose money. They could put money into manufacturing and then the science doesn't declare itself. And so they've lost hundreds of millions of dollars on something. When the federal government had those PPIs, those public-private partnerships PPP, I should say, and infuse dollars into the process so that these drug companies could raise large-scale trials and could look at processes in parallel that were once sequential and look at preclinical. Like you've heard also as part of the misinformation that these vaccines didn't go through a proper phase 0 or preclinical phase where they were tested in animals. That's not true. It's just that the phase 0 overlapped the phase 1.
Okay.
And so there were several things that we learned that were for the better of mankind that we ought to fight for going forward. That's also leading with equity. That's saying when you have even diseases that are endemic, right? They're just present in the community at baseline. They're not surging and in pandemic proportions, but because coronavirus someday will become endemic, I believe. It'll be like a seasonal flu. And so we need to figure out how better to collaborate to solve issues, and especially issues that are disproportionately impacting certain groups.
Now, we're winding down a bit because I could keep you here until dinner and breakfast because you're just a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. And the fact that you had the loss yourself, you went through the trial, you are a medical doctor, all of these things, you just really, I look at you as a medical missionary, really. So now we get this latest advisory from CDC. People are very confused. I am keeping my mask on.
Me too.
Good. Me too. I love it.
Me too. So let me tell you, I actually, and this is fascinating. Okay, this is real world science that we're experiencing, right? So in New Jersey, I believe Governor Murphy just announced that we've hit 70% of adults that have had at least one shot. So we have like 3.7 million people who've had at least one shot. The goal is to have 70% that's fully vaccinated. And so we're making our way there, but there's still pockets in Black and brown communities. There's still pockets in certain regions within our state and even across the nation where access presents a formidable issue still. Outside of access, there are issues around social and cultural fluency, making sure we meet people's information needs, making sure we understand their rationale for why they are where they are in their decision journey. So I say that at baseline, that's what's happening. And then the CDC comes out, and I don't question the science. I want to be very, very clear, but it felt like whiplash. It felt like whiplash because it was unexpected. It caught me off guard, and it caught a few of us I'm not going to say more than a few. I think it caught a lot of us in the public health community off guard. I would have fully expected the CDC to say, because we don't have a high enough proportion of the public vaccinated, that they would recommend that we maintain status quo around indoor masking, at least for a month. That's what I expected, right? I expected us to get through May, potentially get deep into June, and then the CDC to talk about relaxing indoor masking. I'm totally in favor of relaxing outdoor masking, especially for those of us who are fully vaccinated in safe scenarios. If you're out and you're taking a run, if you're with vaccinated members of your family, yes, you can safely take off your mask. We know that coronavirus is transmitted through airborne transmission, but transmission outdoors is very, very minute. Okay, where I don't think unvaccinated people, if you're unvaccinated and you're in a crowd, you should very well be wearing a mask. And you're outdoors, I think you should just wear a mask at all times, unless you are isolated and you are not encountering other unvaccinated people. Indoors, everyone should still have on a mask. That's just where I am right now, because there isn't a system to say, hey, are you vaccinated, or hey, you're not vaccinated. And so yes, the CDC created carve outs, but it's whiplash for the public, and it's leaving businesses, I think, flat-footed and in a position that's not necessarily the best public health wisdom. I went out to a mall to run a quick errand. I had my mask on. I've been fully vaccinated for a long time. I'm not taking that mask off. And I think we all should have those masks on. I was in a beauty salon when the CDC news broke. Predominantly Black women. The shop owner was like, look, everyone in the shop, you will still be wearing a mask. I'm sending out an email to my customers. You must still wear a mask. She was fully vaccinated. She's like, I got fully vaccinated because of you, Dr. Chris. Okay. But we will be wearing a mask because we're just not there yet.
Two other questions have come up. I want to give a shout out to Randy Sotomayor. That's a former student of mine who I haven't seen in about 51 years. So I'm glad to see he's watching today. So Randy, I have your question, and Marianne, I have yours. First one, what do you think about children being vaccinated?
I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of it because the science has demonstrated that it's safe. As long as we stick to the ethical and the scientific process that we're currently undertaking and doing it in this rational fashion, there are huge benefits to children being vaccinated. And the benefits are, yes, children have less severe outcomes, but it doesn't mean that children can't get very sick. And it doesn't mean that children can't die. Children are now, at the last count, reported to be responsible for almost a quarter of all new cases. That is a rise. That is a significant rise. And that wasn't true before, because now children are among that unvaccinated group. So the virus is looking for hosts. That's the only way that the virus survives, by having a host, having a body, having a person. And so I have my nieces. We're looking to get appointments for my nieces. I've been helping families in my church find appointments. We know from the science that 12 to 15-year-olds for Pfizer, because Pfizer was tested in 16 and above. That's why they did a carve out and evaluated it in 12 to 15-year-olds, that you have just as strong an antibody response as you do in the next older age group, and that you see a similar side effect profile. Sometimes younger persons have stronger side effects because their immune systems are so strong. And remember, those side effects are normal. They are routine. It's part of the inflammatory process that your immune system is working. It does not mean you're infected, because there is no live coronavirus in these vaccines. It just means your immune system got a kick, like, whoa, and it's in overdrive. And so it's safe. And the science is currently ongoing in younger age groups. The science is ongoing in folks as young as 6 months old. And so we will have an answer likely by the winter for even younger populations, and then probably into the following year for the youngest of the population.
It's funny that you should mention about that the science is ongoing, because I did see a medical physician, medical doctor, who has entered her young child. I don't even know if he walks yet.
Yes.
Yeah, and the person on CNN asked her, well, how do you feel about that? Or if it doesn't work out the way you want, what would you say to your child? And she said, feel honored and privileged.
Yes.
That I have a child who can be a part of the study to help other people.
And I think that's amazing. I think one other thing I would add to that, to help people to understand, childhood cancers are devastating. And childhood cancers were even more devastating in the past than they are today, because we had less answers. Brave families, very brave families, enrolled their children in clinical research trials to get at answers, to find more solutions against childhood cancers. And so this is how science moves forward. They're always the brave. They're always those who are saying, this is how I can, because we all have a role to play. You're brave even if you don't participate in a clinical research trial. You're brave in another way. You have an opportunity to be brave. But let's call out and single out those who make those choices. So I salute the moms and the dads that are enrolling their children, because we need to be able to answer definitively so that we can arrive at what I call and others call community immunity or population immunity.
I'm going to get to the other question that Randy is asking, and I'm hoping I know the answer to it. But I'm going to tell you something. You're making me feel extremely guilty because my primary care doctor, who I just love, he's been my primary care doctor for a lot of years. He said to me back in April 2020, he said, Janine, just give some thought to this. He said, if you want to enter the trial, I can get you in. And I remember looking at him and saying, are you crazy? in the middle of a pandemic and people are dying, and you're asking me if I'm interested in being a part of a trial. He said, look, I'm not going to force it, but you would be an amazing candidate. He said, you're a senior citizen. You have a lot of the issues that I would like to see: hypertension, high cholesterol. Well, cholesterol is down now, but
Good, good.
I'd like you to think about it. And he said, you've lost almost 50 pounds. He said, this would be perfect. And I wouldn't do it. And I tell you, if I have an opportunity in the future to be a part of a trial, you have, if nothing else from this show today, you have made me totally rethink that.
Well, that's good to hear. And you know why that's so important? It's not just important when we're fighting against a pandemic, but a part of the inequities that we face is that we don't have adequate representation in clinical research trials among diverse racial and ethnic groups. And why is that important? That isn't important because necessarily there's going to be some distinct biological difference, but it's important because of how there's genetic expression and how a particular pharmaceutical may react to a particular person is influenced by their social settings and their environments. And so we need to be able to answer definitively, do these therapeutic or even preventive tools work across the gamut of the population? And a lot around the reasons for underrepresentation of persons of color in clinical research. One is access. So I salute your doctor for asking you. So one is access, but think about others who having an opportunity to participate isn't presented to them, or it's not feasible, it's not convenient. There is a cost barrier, meaning either they might have to take time from work, or what's the transportation, what's the time commitment. And so I'm hopeful that as part of the articulation around the need for equity, to lead with equity, is that we also explain to people the importance of clinical research in having Blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native and Indigenous groups, people with all host of medical conditions across the age spectrum, across the sexual orientation and gender identity spectrum. We need to have representation in all parts of the academic medical complex, in all aspects of medicine, public health, and clinical research for us to solve for justice. We need that. And
Do you know the teaching you're doing right now? Oh my goodness. Because when we talked about your coming onto the show, it was a whole different agenda.
yes.
But what you're doing right now, Doc, is just, money can't even pay for it. And some of the comments that I'm hearing, one of my classmates from high school, we graduated in 68. I think the last time I saw her might have been 1970. And she's saying it's so informative. It's just amazing. Now, Randy Sotomayor's, and thank you, Randy. Some days I feel like I'm a leader, and some days I feel like I'm walking by myself. But one of the things that Randy is asking is, what about flying? Now, my son-in-law is a pilot. So is it safe to fly?
So I had to fly in July. I had a semi-professional event that was urgent, and I needed to attend something in Wyoming. So I flew in July. At that point, I hadn't even enrolled yet in the trial. I was doubly masked. I was practicing extreme physical distancing. I never took my mask off, washing my hands frequently and vigorously. And now I would have more comfort flying fully vaccinated, but I don't think I would unmask on a plane because I just don't know what level of the public, the buy-in public is vaccinated. Even though it's a small risk to myself, I still just think we need to model the best of the public health science, the most effective means of the public health science. So if you would like to travel and you're fully vaccinated, I think you can do that safely. Just continue to take precautions. Just continue to practice masking when you're indoors. Continue to practice masking if you're in a cramped or unventilated or poorly ventilated area, because others might be there who are unvaccinated. And then if you're going to be outdoors, enjoy the outdoors. I'm considering a trip to the Grand Canyon. I love to travel. And I need this as a way to reconnect with self and to practice harmony. So I think there are safe ways to travel.
My granddaughter, who lives with me, I'm so happy. As you know, I Lost my partner
I'm
September
very, very
27th.
sorry to hear.
And I don't know how the morning would have gone if I had to be in grief here by myself in this big house all this time during a pandemic. So she asked her fiance, what do you want for your birthday? And he said, well, I want to go to Cancun and I'm paying for it. And so I said, oh no, you're going to Cancun. You're going to stay. You're going to another country. And she said, Mimi, it's going to be really safe. So they went for 10 days. She just came back yesterday morning. But she called me Friday morning. She said, I want you to know they wouldn't let us get back on the plane until our COVID test came back. I said, oh, they do the COVID coming back too, not just going. She laughed. She said, so we're negative, but God love her, even though, and I want our viewers to hear this, even though she has been vaccinated and he has been vaccinated, they're both in their 20s, late 20s.
Excellent.
Even though they've been vaccinated, even though they got the COVID test coming back. Well, he lives in his place in New York. But when she came back home, she is still wearing her mask inside.
Oh, wow.
And
So
she is going to wear, and I didn't ask her to.
Yeah, she's going
to wear her mask. And when she's around me, we're socially distanced, but when she's around me, she's going to wear her mask for at least 7 days.
Wow. And I'm not, I love to travel and I love to travel internationally. And I've told myself probably by the fall or winter. And if their community spread where I wanted to go is nil. I'm thinking about Australia. I have my sights. I have a high school friend who's there. Yeah, I'm thinking about Australia and New Zealand around the end of 2021. But there are ways, safe ways to travel if you're fully vaccinated.
So as we close, there is one more comment that was made that I want to raise. We have a nurse on here. She is a PDRN.
Okay.
And she is saying that your information that you're giving, you're just so clear spoken. And she said, brilliant, which I totally concur. I could have written that comment myself. And she wanted to know, are you being asked to go on CNN or anything? And Kay Frazier, the answer is yes. I mean, she is a regular guest. On both
I'll be on CNN tomorrow in the 11 a.m. hour.
11 a.m. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll probably be on again in the 6 a.m. hour another day. Yeah, so frequently. This all started with the site investigator saying, I had someone reach out to me in the press, and I think you have a very interesting story, Chris. Can I give them your name? And I said, sure, because I believe in the power of storytelling and the power of public narratives. And it went from me being interviewed by Y, a media outlet, to a CNN request till today. I've been on BBC, MSNBC, CBS Morning, CBS Evening, NBC, Now, you name it. I've been in print all throughout every major periodical that you can think of. And that's been a blessing. That's the Heavenly Father really has created a lane. And as I'm telling people, I'm taking this moment and I'm going to turn it into a movement. That's what my father and mother would want of me. That's what my community deserves. And that's how we not just get back to who we were as a country, but how we get to who we should be as a country.
Well, I'm glad, and I chuckled to myself when I texted you that morning to see if you could come on. I never thought you would say you'd come on Sunday. I'm thinking, oh, she's going to give me like 2 weeks out. And then I text you so early. Well, but you are Dr. Chris Pernell. And I laugh because, I go out walking every morning during the week at 6 o'clock. I'm trying to keep my weight down and stay healthy. So I said, I'm going to text her. I guess it might have been a little before 6. And when you said, well, yes, I'm walking out of the studio, I wasn't expecting you to see the text until an hour or so later. And I'm like, she's walking out of the studio. What studio were you in that early in the morning?
CNN.
I love it. I love it. Well, look, keep doing what you're doing. You have broken off some wonderful nuggets here today. We are definitely going to have you back on CNN. I mean, back one. I'm not seeing him yet, but we're going to take their place one day on LaRue's Cafe. And I want to say to the folks who are watching this, you feel free to share this interview, this recording around. We want as many people as possible to hear the message of what Dr. Chris T. Pernell, I like to do all three of it, has broken off here today. She is a walking encyclopedia on this. And for what the journey that she would have liked to not have traveled to become the expert that she is. That journey makes the information she's giving us much more credible and much more valuable. So, Doctor, thank you very much for coming on. Enjoy the rest of this Sunday. And we're bringing you back because you have a lot to say about a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And we want to hear it all. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you.
Thank you.